with their significant other or guest. And if you're not a paid member yet, you have until November 27th to do so, to get an invitation to this party, which would be great. It's going to be underwritten and sponsored by Bank of America, Merrill Lynch. So tonight, we're going to be hearing from Ed Cross, who serves as president of the Kansas Independent Oil and Gas Association, or Cayuga, where he's responsible for public policy, advocacy, and interaction with external stakeholders, including elected officials, regulators, government folks, community leaders. Ed serves as executive board member to the Domestic Energy Producers Alliance and a board member to the Council for a Secure America. He's an active member of the National Stripper Well Association of America, Independent Petroleum Association of America, serving on the IPAA Supply Demand Committee and the Pipeline Safety Task Force. He also serves as a member of the Kansas Freight Advisory Committee and as an advisory board member to the Tertiary Oil Recovery Program and the Chemical and Petroleum Engineering Department at the University of Kansas. In 2005, Ed was elected to serve as Secretary-Treasurer of the Liaison Committee of Cooperating Oil and Gas Associations, a network of state and regional trade associations that represent the independent oil and natural gas exploration and production industry in the U.S. And he is responsible for coordinating the organization's efforts. Mr. Cross is a Kansas appointee of the Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission. He served from 2005 to 2007 as chair of the Public Outreach Committee. In 2013, he was named Ingram's Kansas City Business Magazine as one of the 50 Kansans you should know, and you're going to all meet him tonight. He was honored with the Distinguished Leadership Award from the National Stripper Well Association, and that's a different kind of stripper than we're all familiar with. He's published 8 peer-reviewed papers on economic, environmental, and energy education issues. He's a licensed professional geologist, holding a BS in geology and an MBA from Southern Illinois University. And he's going to speak to us tonight about oil and gas. It's an honor to have you here, Mr. Cross. Come on up and share your thoughts with us.
All right. Thank you very much. I think he's getting the PowerPoint ready for me. While we're doing that, I will say, I talked about the National Stripper Well Association. My brother, I had to talk about my brother-in-law, because when I won that award, I have my brother who also works at a state prison in Illinois. He's a superintendent of the school there. But my brother-in-law, after I won that award, said he would tell everybody that his 2 brother-in-laws, one of them was in prison and the other one won Stripper of the Year award. But I do thank you for the kind introduction and for the invitation to be here. And it's my pleasure to come and talk to you tonight a little bit about the oil and gas industry. And thank you for taking time from your busy schedules. And I certainly hope to make it worth your while. What I'd like to share tonight is some thoughts about the American energy picture today. The challenges faced by the small businesses that make up the independent oil and gas industry, and what we're doing as an industry to address those challenges. As he said, I'm president of the Kansas Independent Oil and Gas Association, or Cayuga, and many of you may have heard that organization. Cayuga has 4,200 members across the state of Kansas, and we're the lead state and national advocate for the Kansas oil and gas industry. And it's my honor and privilege to serve this great industry of small businesses in the independent oil and gas industry, because they truly embody the spirit of the American entrepreneur. Because there's a story of daring talent, a dedication to an idea even when the odds are great, and of the unshakable belief that in America all things are possible. And it's my honor and privilege to be able to serve an industry that enhances life experiences and improves the quality of life for people and societies around the world. And, one of our members is Tim Hellman. I see Tim out here, and he represents one of those entrepreneurs out there that are there. There may be other members here, I don't know, but I did see Tim earlier. So I'll go through some things pretty fast. This is part of a presentation based on a white paper I developed with a lot of policymakers about the oil and gas industry in Kansas. So I may go through some of the slides pretty fast for the interest of time, and then if there's any questions at the end, I'd be glad to try to answer those. The American Renaissance has occurred over the last decade or so. It's a 21st century success story that has changed the global energy landscape. There's been over 20 new oil and gas fields found in the United States. It has added $1.2 trillion to the U.S. gross domestic product. And these are led by independents, and I'll talk about what the difference is between an independent producer and a major producer here in a little while. But this renaissance has also created some changes in the global energy markets that have impacted the oil and gas industry across the nation, as well as here in Kansas. So if we look at what has happened over the last several years, crude oil prices dropped by more than 60% from the mid-2014 through 2016. And there were several drivers that contributed to that fall. Many of those are listed up there, but the most significant driver of that was the was the shock that OPEC created in the oil markets through their actions to regain market share at any cost. OPEC, the OPEC cartel, made up of 14 nations. They control about 1/3 of the world's oil supplies, and they collude to control crude oil prices. So the market is an oligopoly when we do that. My daughter's out of college now, but whenever she was first born, I used to go to talk to different groups around. I'd always say that, I tell my daughter would at that time say, quit telling people that story. But when she was born, I told my wife, let's name her Oligopoly. We named her, I got vetoed on that, we named her Rachel. So she likes that name much better, I think. The market is an oligopoly, meaning that here in Kansas, we're really price takers, not price makers in this particular market. So in response to this dramatic increase in U.S. oil production from all of these new fields that were found throughout the United States, as we saw the map up there, OPEC decided in November of 2014 to dump low-cost oil on the global markets in an effort to drive down the price of oil and punish U.S. oil producers. So oil producers had to come up with some capital budgeting decisions. And upstream costs, upstream is the part of the industry that produces the oil and natural gas. But upstream costs in 2016 for onshore plays were 25 to 30% below their 2012 levels and 16 to 20% lower than the average of the past 5 years. So the producers have used supply chain optimization, operational improvements, and refocused their CapEx on core assets that have led to an overall decrease in per barrel of oil equivalent produced. So the average cost of producing a barrel is down about $10 a barrel because of all of that. But that does not factor in the market value of the oil and gas produced from these wells, which is important for calculating the net present value of profit or loss. So the oil and gas operators have displayed a lot more discipline in 2016 as well as much of 2017. However, the oil and gas industry has a history of destroying capital as commodity prices improve. So moderate growth in oil production would best serve the industry by reducing the risk of a repeat of what happened in 2014 and 2015. So what has the impact of the collapse of oil on the industry? Whenever you look at that nationally, and I'll talk a little bit about Kansas in particular. When you look at CapEx, of course, which capital expenditures, which are funds used by companies to maintain the scope of their operations, it's very important. That's what helps build infrastructure and creates jobs and investment in the future. So CapEx nationally was cut $61.2 billion in the oil and gas industry in 2015, nearly $90 billion in 2016. Number of layoffs, I'll talk about more of that. When you look at companies, over 100 North American oil and gas producers filed bankruptcy since the beginning of 2015. And whenever you look at that to the Kansas level, many companies in Kansas and elsewhere cut CapEx by 75 to 80% since mid-2014. So they, last year, Kansas oil and gas industry invested $300 million here in Kansas when it invested $1.3 billion in 2014. Companies have deferred well completions, and many high-cost marginal wells are being temporarily shut in. And when you shut in a well, then that has an impact on royalty payments, which in Kansas dropped by $400 million last year. So that affects people that are not just producers, but many landowners as well. And this is having a profound effect on the oil and gas service sector, where we're seeing large job cuts, as much as 1 million indirect industry layoffs nationwide. So in Kansas, much like the rest of the nation, oil and gas service companies have laid off as much as 55 to 60% of their workforce and reduced wages sometimes as much as 20 to 25%. All of that has reduced family income across the state of Kansas by $341 million last year. So the direct oil and gas employment loss in the Kansas oil and gas industry since 2014 is over 3,100. And when you add in indirect jobs, employment loss has jumped to over 6,100. So when we look at, talked about independents, we said, who are the independents? The independents are the small businesses that produce the oil and natural gas. They're not the integrated companies that sell the end products. So we produce the oil and gas and sell it to a purchaser. In the United States, 95% of the wells are drilled by independents, so the small businesses. Kansas, 92% of the oil and 63% of the natural gas are produced by independents. So one of the things about independent is we raise our capital through the wellhead. So we're not tapping equity markets for that capital. We're trying to use our cash flow from the well in order to drill more wells or complete the wells that we have. They have a strong skill set based upon their size and their scope. Many of them know their backyard geology and how to complete wells in their neck of the woods. So, oftentimes, you'll have companies that will come in that will bring something that's worked in a different basin, in a different area, like Pennsylvania, like Dr. Perry was talking there. And that may not work in Kansas, but in Kansas, the operators that have been here, they know the formations and how to complete wells in those. Just like people, small producers in other areas too. I wouldn't say you can take the Kansas model and go anywhere and it'd work. You have to know the area in your neck of the woods that you're working in. What I say is these small independents, they have a subsurface intelligence that you just cannot buy. And so it's from the experience of over the years. And these small businesses make up the majority of the oil and gas independent oil and gas industry, and they're concentrated in mature, largely conventional oil and gas producing areas like Kansas. When you look at Kansas, you can see oil and gas is produced over the entire state. 89 of the 105 counties have oil and gas production. This map from the Geologic Survey. The green area is oil production. The bright red is the natural gas production, and the blue area is where oil and natural gas is produced. So you can see they're over the entire state. When you look at the average production well, in Kansas, the average oil well makes 2.63 barrels a day. That's a marginal well. The average natural gas well makes 27,000 cubic feet per day. When I'm in Washington in particular, and I talk to policymakers, they're always surprised, except for our own congressional delegation, but policymakers from other states are always surprised that the average well makes 2.63 barrels of oil per day, but that industry provides $3 billion in family income, supports 118,000 jobs in the state of Kansas. That always surprises them, and you can tell them that there's the industry has invested $1 billion in 8 of the last 11 years into rural Kansas, and there's very few industries that will invest $1 billion a year into rural Kansas. So when you look at the production in Kansas, it's down 14.25% last year in 2016, and that was down 8.1% the year before that in 2015. So since 2014, total production has dropped 21%. 78% of the value of production comes from oil in Kansas, and then 22% of that value comes from natural gas. So if you look since then, the industry in Kansas has lost $730 million in oil and gas output in Kansas since 2014. This has not only affected the industry, it's also affected state revenues. When you look at severance tax collections to the state of Kansas, that was down 40% last year, and it's been down 75% since 2014. Ad valorem taxes have been down 69% since the year 2014. So that affects counties as well. So there's a lot of, the state and the counties have also seen less revenues on that. When you look at oil and gas activity, permits have dropped by 83% since 2014. 2014, there was 7,100 drilling permits issued in the state of Kansas. Last year, there was 1,166 permits issued. The rig count has dropped by about 78% since 2014. If you look at 2017 so far, we've had 1,298 drilling permits. That's through October, January through October of this year. So that, that would roughly equate to about 1,500 permits this year. So last year we had 1,100 permits. This year we have 1,500 projected permits. So that means permit activity is up about 34%. But certainly not at the 70,000 level yet. When you look at the marginal wells, and that's defined by the Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission as a well that makes 10 barrels of oil per day or less, or 60,000 cubic feet per day or less. There's more than 600,000 of those wells in the United States, and they produce 1.2 million barrels of oil per day, 5.8 billion cubic feet of gas per day, and represent nearly 80% of the total wells in the United States, and about 20% of the production domestically. One of the things about these are called stripper wells, these marginal wells like that, is that every $1 million generated by a marginal well generates $2 million in economic activity elsewhere in the economy. So it has a big impact on the areas that they're located. So with the when you look at what have companies been doing since the prices have been down, for the second consecutive year here in 2017, oil companies have been worldwide have produced more oil and natural gas than they've added in their proved reserves. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that there's fewer available resources, but it just means that at the current prices, there are fewer resources that can be turned into proved reserves. During 2016, CapEx in the oil and gas industry declined by 35% from 2015, and so which suggests a reduction in exploration and development investment. So if you look at a reserves replacement ratio, which is the ratio of proved reserves added in a given year compared to the production of that year. Normally companies would like to have 100%, and it was 100% in 2012, 2013, but it's only been 75% in 2014, 15, and 16. So they haven't been adding back those reserves. If you're not adding drilling and adding reserves, it's like I always tell them, it's like if you own a grocery store and you had all your inventory, but you weren't getting any inventory in, all you were doing is selling the inventory, you're really going out of business. So that's what oil and gas company is doing. If they're not drilling or completing additional zones and adding more reserves to their company, they're just producing the reserves they have, like the inventory, and not getting any reserves to replace that. So that's why reserves replacement ratio is important for many of the people in the industry. Many companies are refocusing their CapEx and are trying to strategize their way out of this downturn. Like I say, they've optimized their cost structures, and the large horizontal companies have done that, but so has the small producers across Kansas and elsewhere. Most Kansas producers are looking at the most resilient short cycle projects and are concentrating on their core competencies to develop those. The more efficient service providers have contributed to that cost. Since oil prices started falling in the mid-2014, reduced demand for oil field services have enabled operators to renegotiate contracts with service providers that provided lower costs. Now, sales of oil field services in Kansas has dropped by 60% since 2014. And so, many of these providers have gone out of business. But as demand starts to rise a little bit for those services, price of those services could rise. And I think what we're seeing right now is oftentimes now you'll have to wait. A lot of these service companies have laid off, a lot of people, and so they may have the equipment, they don't have the people to operate it. So if an operator needs a service, a cementing service or other type of service, sometimes they may have to wait a little bit to get it so that they can get to it. Many analysts, I believe, underestimated how quickly production could fall whenever you cut CapEx in the industry. Because when you take CapEx away, oftentimes they'll just look at decline curves and say, well, this decline curve for this field is going to drop at this rate. But if you're not drilling more wells or providing any maintenance to those wells, that rate drops faster than you think. And I think that's some of what happened early last year. and low oil prices accelerated production declines. But the U.S. is starting to reverse that decline, and it looks like some of those gains will be modest, but the growth rate will be steady throughout 2018. Many producers are restructuring and selling assets, and you have opportunistic buyers that are looking to acquire different fields. That didn't really take off early in 2015 or even 2016 because many companies had hedge positions on the oil they were selling. They had reduced break-even levels as they reduced their costs. They also had a valuation gap between buyers and sellers of property. Sellers still wanted to sell properties based on $80 oil, where a buyer was wanting to buy it based on $30 oil. So that didn't work too good. But recently, buyer activity has increased as that buyer-seller gap has closed. So some companies are looking at the lower 10 to 15% of their portfolio to see if they could divest that and refocus that CapEx on better assets. So we look at key challenges facing the producers, and of course, crude oil prices is one of the first things. And I'll just pause here a minute because I know I was asked earlier, where would I project oil prices to go, or what would be the optimum oil price for that out there? And it always reminds me of a story about a consultant. And I know there may be consultants in the crowd, so please understand I'm not trying to insult consultants here. But whenever you ask about oil prices, I think it always reminds me of the story of the consultant that was driving down the road, and he came around a corner, and this farmer had this large flock of sheep that was crossing the road, so he had to stop and wait for this flock of sheep to go across. So the consultant got out of his vehicle, and he saw that large flock, and he went over to the farmer, and he said, "Boy, this is a large flock." He says, "If I could tell you how many sheep is in that flock, would you give me one of those animals?" And the farmer thought, "There's no way this guy could do it. It's a large flock." So he says, "Okay, you can do that." So the consultant went back. He had all the technology, looked up Google Earth and everything on his computer, figured out that what it was. He came out and he goes, "I know what it is. You have exactly 1,342 sheep in this flock." And that farmer says, "Well, that's amazing. That's exactly right." So he said, "I'm going to take one of these animals." So he loaded up the animal and put it in his vehicle. And the farmer said, "Well, just wait a minute right there, a minute. Could I have a chance to win my animal back?" And the consultant thought, "Well, okay, he was fair enough to give me a chance. I'll give you." He says, "What do you have in mind?" He says, "If I could tell you what you do for a living, would you give my animal back?" And he knew he hadn't told the farmer that he was a consultant. And he wouldn't guess that, he thought. So he said, "Okay, we'll do that. But go ahead and think about it. Take your time. Go back and do." The farmer says, I don't need any more time. I know what you are. You're a consultant." And he says, "Well, that's exactly right. How'd you know that?" He says, "Well, there was 3 clues. One, first you came unannounced. Second, you told me something I already knew. And 3, you don't know anything about my business. Now give me back my dog." I'm not ever like to predict where oil prices are going to go because I would for sure be wrong on all that. But that is one of the challenges that we look at. I talked about how OPEC dumped low-cost oil in 2014 and drove down prices. Late last year, late in 2016, OPEC and non-OPEC nations met and agreed to move about 1.8 million barrels of oil per day from the market. And that agreement extends through March of 2018. Now, important note of that is that even though they cut back production, and Saudi Arabia was the key country that cut that back, Saudi oil drilling activity has been up ever since then, indicating that they fully intend to maintain sufficient spare capacity to crash prices if the OPEC and non-OPEC code of discipline deteriorate. So the agreement by OPEC to cut production was good news for balancing the global supply-demand. However, OPEC's output was still greater than the oil demand in the first half of 2017, which resulted in lack of any sustainable price rally. Then in August of 2017, we as an association joined many of our colleagues at the Domestic Energy Producers Alliance in meetings with U.S. Energy Secretary Rick Perry regarding the Energy Information Administration's methodology and modeling tools for U.S. production forecasts. We did this because we felt like the EIA was over-forecasting U.S. production growth and exit rate in 2017 by as much as 500,000 barrels a day. Now that over forecast, reason that was so important to us about over forecasting, because that was having about a 10 to 20% impact, negative impact, a decrease in West Texas intermediate prices and putting oil below critical investment thresholds. So then what that did is it drove the oil and gas industry to lower their CapEx for exploration and production and their growth profiles, which further diminished West Texas intermediate price relative to Brent price. That's a spread, as we call that. This spread between Brent and West Texas Intermediate disadvantaged U.S. producers for that. So the EIA took that information and then they changed the way that they forecasted U.S. oil production in September of this year, 2017, and began to lower its estimate. And over the last 2 months, September and October, they lowered, I think in October they lowered their estimate by 44,000. I can't remember what they lowered it in September. That's 2 months in a row that they lowered their estimate of U.S. production. So global demand for crude oil has been growing slowly in 2017, and that higher demand combined with the exports that the U.S. is able to do now has helped balance the U.S. market. Many experts see late October as marking the rebalancing of the crude oil market. In October, OPEC said they would extend those cuts that are going through March of 2018. They plan to extend those through June of 2018. But called on the U.S. to help curtail that supply and balance the market in 2018. So producers in the U.S., I think especially some of those in those large plays, they know that, or they should, because they become aware that if they could get left out on a limb and not have the oil price to justify it if they try to get too ambitious with their production ramp-ups. There is a real belief now that the oil market is stabilizing on the upswing, and the reason for that is that the oil has been steady above $50 for much of October and November, which is a key psychological factor in the market. Now, I've been talking about oil. I'm just going to mention natural gas briefly. I did read where the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, thinks there's going to be a record for natural gas in the winter of this winter, 2017-2018, resulting in 8% growth in natural gas production. They predict the winter to be 12% colder. So we'll see where what that's going. Another thing we were been working on is market dynamic issues. Again, we met with Secretary Perry, Stephen Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, Senator Burr, they're from North Carolina, on an issue with Russian investment into Venezuela's oil industry. Rosneft, a Russian company, loaned the PDVSA, the Venezuelan state oil company, $1.5 billion, if I remember right. This was probably even late last year, early this year. And the Venezuelan government put up as collateral for that the assets of the oil company, including Citgo refining assets. Now, so if they default on that loan, Venezuela, which many experts think they will, that means Russia will get the Citgo refining assets, which is a top 10 refinery in the United States. So we think that's a national security issue. Because if Russia didn't like what the U.S. was doing in Central Europe or something, they could say, we're going to shut down Citgo refining assets for unscheduled maintenance, and that would be like a Katrina type of impact on the gasoline market in the United States. So what we did is we went and visited with the secretaries, and they have a committee on foreign investment in the U.S., CFIUS, and we wanted a CFIUS review. Stephen Mnuchin chairs that. That's why we're on that. Energy Secretary Perry's on that as well, to review the national security implications of, and ask them to review that particular transaction there to see if there might be something that they would want to do on that. So when you look at what powers U.S. today, about 65% of energy consumption is oil and gas, 81% is from fossil fuels. And whenever you look at this is from the Energy Information Administration. This is another graphic from them as well. When you look at the future, 60% of our energy consumption will be from oil and gas. And if you look at world energy consumption from the International Energy agency. They're predicting energy consumption will be up by 27% by the year 2040, and 77% of that will be met by fossil fuels.